Welcome back, everybody. We are here, another episode, another interview, and I'm so excited to be here doing another video interview for you guys because I do enjoy doing the video. I spend a lot of time on the radio doing the interviews that way, but I still really enjoy doing it in video format because I just really enjoy this format and doing it one on one, doing an interview. As you guys know, it's just something I really much enjoy doing, and I just thank you guys for joining me once again because I do have a great interview lined up here, and it's on a topic that I think is super important and one that has been following me around now for almost 2.5 weeks. It just seems that when I get talking to people, it comes up for some reason, which was not the case a few months back. It would come up the odd time, but lately it's really been coming at me, and so I've gotten into some pretty intense discussions about this topic, which is religion. And so I figured, let's do a show on it. I want to bring a guest on that I have had on before, and I'm very good friends with, and I enjoy our conversations. I learned so much from the information they put out there, and I figured this was the gentleman to get on here because he has experience with this, and I think it'll be a great topic, a great discussion. So I'm hoping you guys are going to enjoy this. I'm going to go ahead and just welcome my guest on right now. Welcome, Chris Jantzen from the End Evil podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey Rick, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Yeah, I'm excited about, starting 2023 and really going full throttle and becoming a better person and helping this world shake off some of this evil BS that's been holding us back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, and as you heard in the intro, this was a topic. But before we get into the religion topic, I just want everybody. Can you let everybody know, because you just did an amazing presentation for Funnel 2? So can you let people know about what your topic was and where they can find all of your work and your presentations, because it's great stuff, and I want to make sure that I leave a link in the description for people to find all your work.
Right on. Rick, I'm going to put one link in our chat, and that actually is if you go to freedomundernaturallaw.com
Mm-hmm.
and you scroll down, you can look at the original Freedom Under Natural Law Conference. There were, the original members of our group, the Natural Freedom Alliance, each made a presentation on the original funnel conference. And that one, I did a presentation called The Ultimate Connection. And I think that presentation really applies to what we're going to talk about going forward with this religion topic.
Mm-hmm.
But then we did Funnel 2, and Funnel 2 was the convergence. And on that conference, I did a presentation called Humanity's Most Powerful Weapon. And you
Awesome.
can find Humanity's Most Powerful Weapon on freedomundernaturallaw.com, or you can go to endevil.life, and that's my website. And I just realized I haven't put my Ultimate Connection presentation on my website. I was just scrolling through and realizing that. So I just made a little note. That's a job I have to do. So, but I wanted to share that link because the Ultimate Connection was really my initial presentation for Funnel. What really was me describing my transition and my learning process of going from spirituality and the way I used to see it from the Christianity lens
Mm-hmm.
to not aligning with Christianity at all, and then coming back around to understanding natural law and reintegrating my spirituality with now what I see as the natural law.
Right.
And so that progression was really described in that original presentation I did. And then I've moved on with Funnel 2 of trying to talk about, like, how do we actually make that happen? And that's going to
Right.
require us working together and working on our relationships and understanding morality. And
Ab-
that's really the basis of all my work, is the importance of morality in today's world.
Absolutely. Yeah, your presentations are amazing, and it's I learned very quickly it's a sensitive topic when you start talking about religion. Especially when you got some people that are very, very deep into, Christianity, and that's the case that I ran into, is a couple people I've talked to very deep into Christianity, and it got heated. It, like, not heated. I don't like to say it that way because I don't want to make it sound like it was an argument, because it wasn't. But it was definitely an intense discussion because we were both kind of coming at it from different points, and I kind of saw we were coming at it at this, like, different angles, but we were getting to the same thing in a lot of ways. But it was just really weird how they didn't see it that way. Like it wasn't like, we'll get into that, but I mean, it was just I kept saying to them, we want the same thing, when we're talking about the same thing, we're just getting hung up on words, it seemed, and kind of that angle. And but it was really intense. So I'm glad that we're here. I'm glad that I got you here to kind of discuss it, because can you let people know a little bit about like your, like how you got started in Christianity, like like your story and how you got, just to, because I know your presentation goes over it more in depth, but can you give people just an idea of where you're coming from, like how you got started and
Sure. Yeah, and I want to say, especially in the last 2 years, everything's been hectic with, you know, the major changes we've seen since the pandemic, the
mm-hmm.
scamdemic.
Yep.
And I have found in the Christian community, the area I've moved to, the most, how can I say, understanding the basic fundamental idea of freedom and respecting personal choice. I have found that a lot more in the community of people that call themselves Christians than I have in the other communities that I've spent time in. Obviously, outside of our natural law
Right.
community and the freedom community, the Christians I really think are important allies in this battle. And that's why I really was trying to, with Ultimate Connection, kind of bridge this gap. And I think, like you're saying, when you have a personal conversation with somebody, there's this built-in part of us that wants to kind of convince or change the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And that is baked into Christianity and every religious church I've ever been to. And I've been to a lot of religious churches. It's part of the deal is that your job as a member of a church is to try to explain the word to other people, to try to spread the word, to try to spread the light into the world, right?
Right.
And so, way I grew up, and the reason I'm so familiar with is my dad was a preacher. Um, he, we started out going to a Methodist church every Sunday, strictly. We didn't miss a Sunday. We went to Sunday school. We showed up early. My dad was usually running one of the Sunday school classes. Any church event, we were at it. So when I see, like, just today, we were taking down some ornaments off the tree, and all these Christian songs are going through my head. I've sung all the hymns. I've done, a baptism. I've done the whole process. Later, after with the Methodists, I did like a missionary kind of trip to Mexico with a Lutheran church. Then when I turned about 13, we went to what's called the Church of the Brethren, which is a peace-based church.
Mm-hmm.
And Church of the Brethren's kind of a similar background to the Mennonites. And these were the peace church people that came from, like Germany, Russia. These people were coming over here because they were being, what do you call, there was tyrannical forces that wasn't letting them express themselves and trying to force them to fight in wars and such, and they didn't agree with that. And that was, so my family background was kind of like the Mennonites and the Brethrens, and so I wound up back in the Brethren Church of the Brethren, which was really interesting. And that was about the time when my dad had gone through school. He actually got his Master's of Divinity, and he was always, like, during this period of time, writing sermons. And he's not the type of person that just would talk about things on a superficial level. We had books all over the house. We had concordances, lexicons, and he would deeply dive into things. He's a very deep thinker. He loved, like, Alan Watts, for instance, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Kierkegaard. He looked into philosophy on many levels, and he was even interested in other religions. So he started this inside of me, and that always challenging me to think about things and ask questions. But he wasn't the type of Christian that I've met. Some people are very doctrine based. Everything has to be exactly the way, literal, or, right
Yeah.
from the book. And he was one of those that was able to look bigger and look at, words meant different things when these things were written. There's been translations, and there's all these different religions in the world. And so he had a very nuanced view. And so that started me off. And I was like, I remember 13 years old, I used to wear a cross right here around my neck.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember specifically a book that I like to talk about that was called Brother Lawrence, Practicing the Presence and it was about learning to be in communication constantly with God. And I was having these amazing experiences at 13, 14, 15 years old where I felt like I was just talking to God all the time. Like I could get the answers to anything, you know?
Right, right.
And so I had developed what people will say to you as a personal connection, you know, like when you meet these people on the street corner with the flyers, they'll be like, "Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal savior? What time and date?" You know, they're very specific about it.
Right.
And I've been able to have conversations with people that approach me like that and say, "Oh, actually, multiple times I've gone through a process of metamorphosis," and they get frustrated with that answer. But what I've learned is there's a lot more to it than storylines, and religions are based on storylines and you accepting storylines. And what I've come to recognize over the years, breaking away from Christianity and looking at things from my own point of view, is that spirituality is something that each of us has to discover and realize and rediscover for ourselves. And what's actually real, our connection to the divine, can be discovered, and it's very real.
Hmm.
And I find, you know, many Christians that I speak with and know and that are still friends with, we have so much in common, and we can break through a lot of that, um, the divide, so you could say,
Hmm.
just by kind of coming back to morality and what is right and wrong. And I think that is where we need to go with it, because we need to form connections with people in different religions, and it's important for them to recognize that what we're talking about is very similar, and
Exactly.
yet it is crucial that we also describe what this difference is between what we're talking about and what a religion is, and external religion versus internal religion.
Right.
And so we could break down that word a little bit, but just to finish up my background, you know, like, yeah, I was a hardcore Christian. At a certain point, I decided I don't want to be even called a Christian, and I broke away from that. And before that, I had traveled to many, many different churches. I've been in Catholic churches, Christian churches. Um, I've been in what do you call the meetings where you just sit quiet and don't talk at all.
Yep.
Um, and that's is that Mennonite? Uh, the Friends. Anyway, I've been to a lot of different types of churches, and then I joined a volunteer service, which was part of Church of the Brethren. Did that for a couple years, and
Wow.
then years later, I've come back, and that's when I discovered Mark Passio's work and his description of natural law, and going through all his podcasts really reawoken my what I called spirituality
Me
at that
too.
time, and now I call it the divine. And touching into the divine has been a better way for me to describe my spirituality than using the word God, because the word God gets confused
Yes.
with a being, somebody who sits in the clouds, some anthropomorphized um, thing that makes choices, or being, or man, you know,
Hmm.
that actually affects us, and it's a certain personality. And to me, that way of looking at it doesn't work for my own
Right.
understanding and what I've come across over the years. And so where I'm at now is describing nature as the living Bible, and there's symbols and everything. Hermetics describe, you know, sort of like the base principles of reality, first principles. And I still treasure so much from the Bible. I'll probably share a Bible verse today. And I share so much that I love, that I learned in my times with various religions and Christianity. However, I think there's a very important distinction that we need to make today, regarding how we look at and what our perspective is on religion,
Right.
and how we tell these stories going forward.
Definitely. Thank you. Like that's amazing. You're a seeker. That's for sure. Like that's what I take from what you're telling me. You're always looking for answers, and for in that journey you've looked at so many different things. I kind of came at religion from a different aspect, as we were talking before we started filming, like recording this. My family, I went to, as I've told people many times, and I probably sound like a broken record, but went to a Catholic school for the first 8 years of schooling. And it was really weird because, and I've talked to my mother about this more specifically, because I always kind of found it weird why like strange that she did that, because we weren't a family that had a Bible in the house all the time, and we weren't, nobody was reading the Bible necessarily. We maybe would go to church once a year, and that would be on Christmas Eve. My mom would take us to church, and stuff like that. So I always found it really weird because it wasn't that it was practiced in the house at all. And it was, and I'm just like, I just wanted to try to ask my mom, but it's kind of hard to get an answer out of her. I don't think she really, I think she did it, put me in that school and baptized me and did all of that because that's what everyone else was doing, I think. That's the best I can come up with. And so I was that kid in school, especially in the first 8 years, where I was like you, I asked a lot of questions. And when we were going through the Bible and stuff like that, we went through it quite often and would read passages and discuss it. And I had a lot of questions that the teacher and the priest didn't like, so I'd be in trouble all the time. But I was just questioning things, and that's just somebody that's my nature. I like to question things and things that especially don't make sense. And then I found out very quickly that a lot of people don't like that, and that's kind of what I'm running into, Chris, when I talk to people about religion. When we get talking, they get really hung up on, as you were saying. You were saying like God, the word God and stuff, and that's kind of what I was like. And I was like, okay, you call it God, that's fine. I mean, I'm never gonna tell, but you call it. I call it the Creator. That's what that's just the way I refer to it. Is that the Creator of everything, or the universe, or whatever you want to say? And they get hung up on the words. That's where I think a lot of people start butting heads on it, because we were kind of coming at it. And I remember saying during these discussions I was having, we're coming at it from different angles, but we kind of want the same thing. Like in a lot of ways, like you were saying, we have a lot in common. But I find the problem is when you get hung up on words, and that everything has to be like they kept saying to me that either everything in the Bible is real and it's true, or it's all a lie. And I couldn't agree to that. I don't agree with that. So what is your take on that? Because I think we get hung up on the words.
It's funny because I've been doing a lot of thinking about dialectics. Right
Right.
now, Leslie Powers and Derek Bartoloselli are doing the Conquering the Divide, and I've been thinking about, what do I want to talk to them about? People get caught in these dialectics, and
Right.
that is polarized thinking. Um, People tend to be in one side of the brain or the other,
Mm-hmm.
and fluctuate beside one extreme or the other. That's the whole, you know, Pepsi Cola, Coca Cola kind of. Um, Everything's totally opposite. We can't have, two thoughts in our head at one time that disagree, because that would, fry the circuits.
Yep. Yep.
It's very difficult for some people to have two different things in their head at once. And so what they do is they choose the easy route, which is to just accept one storyline that they can stick with. And the more they can stick with, the more security and safety there is in that way of thinking. We all do this to different extents. That's what generalizations are.
Mm-hmm.
Generalizations offer us a way to have a discussion about bigger topics than we can really break down, right? We have to generalize things the more we want to have a grandiose discussion. But doing that too much is like stereotypes, and generalizing people leads to things like racism, or a false interpretation of history, which is what we get through school. We
Mm-hmm.
get these stories that are telling us what happened, but they're really written by a specific group of people, or even one particular person who wants to tell the story in one particular way.
Right.
As any of us know, any situation you could be in life with more than one person, you're going to have two completely different storylines
Exactly.
as far as what happened. Even with someone that you agree with on the basis of the story, you're going to remember different details, and you're going to highlight different aspects of the story. And it's not going to be the same exact story. So, I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Like there's that story about it's like it's not a parable, but it's like a allegory, of all these monks looking at an elephant. They're all blind and they're feeling it, and they're all describing different part of the
Right.
elephant,
Yeah, I heard that.
and they're completely different. One's feeling the tail, one's feeling the trunk, and they're like, well, I feel something small and skinny. And the other one's like, oh, I feel this huge leathery thing. It's like, but they're looking at the same thing. So, I think what's important though, with what you were talking about, when we're having conversations with other people that are in a particular paradigm or way of thinking, it can be a real struggle if we're coming at it from the point of view of, I'm trying to change your point of view, or I'm trying to show you. I've caught myself, even in the last year, I've had like a couple long discussions with someone who's a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And we get really stuck on certain issues, and I catch myself, I'm almost trying to convince them to give up their religion in a way,
Right.
to and it's more than a person can do in a conversation. you're asking someone to lose your religion, basically, or
Mm-hmm.
to at least put it aside and try to look at things without it for a second. But the reason people can't do that is because that's the ground they're standing on. They from the way I was taught in Christianity, you're supposed to understand faith as something that you don't even possibly consider giving up.
Right.
You hold on to it so tight, it's your reality. You're right. And so it'd be like pulling the ground out from underneath you and all of a sudden trying to learn to live in the ocean after living on land your whole life.
Yeah.
You just, it's not a transition that can be made very easily. So I think personally, when it comes to actually having conversations with someone who's um, calls themselves a Christian and is very convinced that the Bible is the ultimate connection,
Mm-hmm.
which to me is not the ultimate connection, um, you can just butt heads,
Oh
or
yeah, that's
you
true.
can instead spend the conversation looking for the ways you do agree with this person. And I've found that to be a lot more productive, to find what we are on the same page about and work from there. And then the other aspect is what you're talking about, is redefining words. None of us were trained in a trivium based way of thinking. we
Absolutely.
should we
Yeah.
should be teaching children to think in a trivium based um, style or process of organization in our mind from the beginning, and then it would be so much easier to have this discussions. Like, so that's what I did in the beginning of the ultimate connection. I talked about, what is God, what does the word mean, what am I talking about when I use that word. I talk about that in my podcast, which is End Evil Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What does evil mean? What do I mean by that word? Because right away, when people see end evil, they're thinking something different than what I'm saying. So
Exactly. Yep.
what do I mean? Evil is the destruction of freedom. I do not mean evil is not the occult. Occult is hidden things. There's nothing evil about things being hidden. You know, lying, now that's a form of stealing. That is evil, you
Yep.
know, and the more severe a lie is, the more evil it is, because it takes away from good. And basically, the way I'm seeing the word God in this presentation is, God is good. Everything that is good, because it is. You know, it just is what it is. That's reality. And when you start trying to separate from that reality or create your own reality, that becomes verging on evil, because you're trying to step on the toes of the creation, of the creator.
Yes.
And I think, if we can agree with someone that there is a such thing as a creator, then we've already come a long way, because a lot of people we can't even share that. And that's a
That's
whole
true.
nother person, a whole nother discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But at least when you're sitting down or on the phone or in a conversation with someone who's a Christian, calls themselves a Christian, we can meet on this. Yes, there is a creator. And for me, that's, we have creation, therefore there is a creator, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Makes
you
sense.
know and then can we agree on truth, that there's a such thing as truth? So what I'm getting at is, starting with the trivium based style, you start with grammar. What are the words we're using, and what do we mean by these words? It's one thing what the dictionary thing, it's another thing what we might find in etymology or the Greek lexicon, or
Mm-hmm.
the Greek original language it was spoken in. But then there's the modern the way the word is used, and then there's the connotations that we dream up, so it can get pretty complicated. So if we start off our conversation with, what are we actually talking about, what do we mean when we use these words, and then sometimes it really helps to use another word to say what we're saying for the sake of the conversation. And that's why in the beginning I told you, when I'm going to talk about God, I'm going to use the word the divine,
Yeah.
or the divine connection, because I don't want you to think of some Zeus like guy in the clouds who shoots lightning bolts at people or affects people's lives in a day-to-day way and says, oh, you shouldn't have done that, like Santa Claus, you're on my naughty list now.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not the way I see things. And if somebody who's listening does, I want them to understand that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the divine connection, which is us being able to, we're actually a conduit, we're actually a pathway, a bridge for the realness of reality to manifest. We make things, we create things, we have the ability, we have hands that can make things, we have a mind that can think thoughts and create ideas. So we are generators. We have the ability, a divinely inspired ability to manipulate and change our environment. And that right there you don't need to prove it. You can prove it by the things we're doing right now. We're talking, we're speaking, we're making a video.
Yep.
We're bringing things into creation that didn't used to exist. And that there just proves my point. If there is a creation, there is a creator, you know?
That's so
And
true.
so if we can agree with those things to get started with, grammar, whoever's listening, that there is a such thing as creation, there is a creator behind creation, and that also there is something called the divine.
Yep.
And if we can agree on those things, we've come a long way. And that's a huge percentage of people that can't agree on just that. And those people are basically moral relativists from my point of view, even though they don't like to be called that, which is touching on Satanism. And those people don't like to hear that either, but it is the truth. In terms of how I'm defining these words, right? Now, someone else might define these words differently and say that's not the truth. And that's where there's going to be some gray area.
Yep.
But, you know, so there is a such thing as truth. There is a such thing as a divine creator. Those are things I think we need to start with to have that discussion.
Agree. Yeah, that's what I was trying to do in the discussions that I was having, because I was saying we were getting hung up on names and just words. And I was kind of doing what you were doing. I was like, okay, well, let's find things that we can agree on, which I think is so powerful, because that it gives us a common ground when we find things that we can agree on. So that's what I was trying to do. But I tell you, Chris, it sounds easy to do, and it really isn't, because I
know.
talked for 5 hours with my friend and got hung up on just that we were going in circles, and I was very cautious not to try to, like, I wasn't like natural law is the way, you know, and trying to hammer, like, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to say that we're kind of want the same thing, and it really, and I even broke down with the word religion, like where it comes from and stuff, and they just didn't seem to even want to have anything of it. So I think it's a tall order. And I agree with what you're saying. Like, let's find things to agree on. And you're not going to change somebody in a day or a conversation. And I agree with that 100% too. So it's great that I think it's a great thing that we can have these discussions, because they're a tricky discussion. I found out too, because you want to be respectful. And I just hope that people realize that I'm not trying to attack anything. I'm just trying to analyze it and look at it. And because I just think it's really a tough subject. It is. And so, I mean, I'm glad that you're here to kind of help me through it, because I definitely stumbled through the couple of times, these couple of discussions that I had. I was stumbling through what I was trying to say, and it's a tall order, Chris. It really is. And I was trying to even say, like, you know, because when I look at the Bible, and I want to get your opinion on this too, Chris, because when I read the Bible and I read passages, and I always look at it as I see it as allegories and stories that are teaching. So they, you know, whether they're teaching natural law, they're teaching it's a morality, or they're teaching principles. And I think that's where the real value is that if you're getting that from the book, that's a good thing. I mean, it's helping you become a better person. But when I have the problem when somebody comes to me and says, well, either you believe every word in the book or it's all a lie. As I was saying earlier, that really stuck with me. I'm like, that's such a hard line to put. What are your thoughts on that? I just think that's such a tough one.
Well, yeah, anytime somebody's, you know, forcing you, you know, in conversation, it's similar to real life. Like, is it okay to coerce somebody into thinking a certain way, or force somebody into thinking a certain way? Like, everybody resists that. Even being taught how to do something, you know, since I've been a kid, I resist someone telling me how to do something. I want to figure it out myself, you know? Yep. So, you know, for someone to put you into that type of a box, say you have to either believe it completely or eliminate it completely, is obviously, you know, very polarized kind of thinking that doesn't allow for, like what I was saying, for entertaining a dialectic, being able to see both sides. If you're asking me to look at your point of view and consider it as being a possibility of truth or reality, then you need to be able to do the same for me.
Exactly.
And so, you know, I am still willing to an extent with someone who's, let's say, a Christian, or let's say even a Buddhist, another religion, to entertain what they're trying to tell me, and to try to look at it from their point of view. But what's difficult about that for me at this point is that I've already gone down that path for 25 years. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I started out my life as a Christian. I went through the Bible. I've read it in multiple different ways. I've studied many of these books and stories. I know these stories really well,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to see the Bible in a different way than I do now. So I'm not going to be able to 100% um, erase all that history of
Right.
of time and energy spent doing the research I've done. So I mean, realistically, I can't expect somebody else to just completely drop their religion and listen to what I said either.
Right.
It's just not that easy. But
It's just
the
frustrating when they don't even look at it from the other side. That's the frustration. That was the frustrating part for me, is that I was like you said, I was really listening to what they had to say. I was like, okay, I do want to understand where you're coming from, and I do understand where they're coming from. But then when you kind of say, okay, now let's look at it from this way, like let's come at it from this way, and we'll see where we can kind of agree on things. And they just, they just won't listen, and like they won't even hear you out. And I just think that's such a very limiting, like you're such in a tight box, like you were just saying, like when you put somebody in that tight of a box, which I think religion does, like an organized religion, I think that it puts you in this box where you can't go anywhere and you can't explore. And if you're in that mindset, and that's where I kind of found the conversation was, it was like, okay, I understand what you're saying, I get it, and I respect it, and I love this discussion. But then when you kind of say, okay, now let's look at it from what I'm saying, and they just shut it down, that's what I kind of ran into. And I was just like, and it's kind of like what you said. Where do you go from there? I mean, you can't.
Well, here's a couple places we could go from there. Like I said, we go back to the grammar. We can look at the words we're using and try to break them down a little better, and then we can look at other aspects of um, perspectives on the situation that they might not have heard of or seen
Mm-hmm.
or thought of. Like, rather than button heads on the part we know we disagree on, let's look at some other things. So, like, I would start with the word religion itself, which I'm sure you did in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the etymology of the word religion, it has a couple basic meanings, right? Um, I like to look at etymonline.com as a starting place for
Okay.
etymology. This gentleman has put together a really vast, he's compiled books and taken these different meanings of words through all through history, and he puts together a really nice um, kind of beginner etymology on
Okay.
words.
Cool.
And so when you look up religion, what you find out is that religion comes from relegare, which means go through again, or relegare, which means to bind fast or to begin again. So this word means to start over or to bind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so there's sort of a positive and a negative connotation to the word religion. And when we think of to bind, that's kind of a scary thing. That's like slavery, like being
Yes.
bound to something, right?
Yep.
But I mean, it can be that way. Think about through history when people have fought for their life. What are the main reasons people will fight for their life or sacrifice themselves? You know, it's because they've been convinced that there's something far more important than themselves,
Right.
or there's something far more important than even their family, and that is, the whole future of their race or their religion, something that they've been told is true about the afterlife, before and after. And if you totally believe that, you can be led into sacrificing your actual body,
Yep.
right?
Very
And
true.
just that alone is a good example, I think, that people can be bound to an idea that doesn't serve them well. And historically, you look back and there's been times when people were convinced of religions that seem kind of silly now, you know
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people lost their life over it. Was it worth it? Did they bring in a new era of humankind where now we have peace and prosperity and we treat each other with care? Did all the religions of history teach us how to be better people, or are we still struggling with it? you know
That's true.
I
Yep.
would say that we're still struggling with it.
Yes.
you
Yes.
know there's still a long way to go. So, yeah, starting with the definition of some of the words, let's talk a little bit about the word faith. What does faith mean? like I said, most of the Christians in the church time I spent, when they were talking about faith, they were talking about taking something, a story, into your head, into your psyche, into your being, and accepting that story 100%
Right.
as fact without ever being able to verify it other than by feelings and by trusting people that are telling you this story. And so that's really what got me into this whole realization that external religions are based on storytelling. And that's a dangerous thing to base your faith on, is a story, because stories can be manipulated. And why wouldn't people with the need for power and the hunger for taking over other people's lives and resources, why wouldn't they manipulate you with stories if it
Exactly.
works? Of course they would.
I was
And
trying to
that's
explain
what,
that. I was
you
trying to
know,
explain that.
I mean, I could put myself back to the days when I was totally calling myself a Christian, like I said, when I was 14 years old. And if I heard someone, I do remember someone telling me that religion is a way to confuse and control people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard for me to hear that. I was like, ooh,
Yeah.
that kind of cuts into what I believe, right? It hurts to hear that,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But when I actually thought about it from a logical point of view later, I'm like, well, there's a lot of truth to that, though, you know? And so if you can't admit something and think about something because it hurts or you don't like how it feels, that doesn't mean it's not true. That just means you don't like it, or you don't like how it feels, or you don't like
Right.
how it affects this thing you call your faith.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious, Rick, to you, what does the word faith mean?
Faith to me. Uh, you're putting me on the spot. That's a tough one.
Ah.
Faith to me.
Well, I love the book "The End of All Evil" by Jeremy Locke. That's
Right.
kind
Yeah.
of what
That's a
gave me
great
the
book.
idea for the End Evil podcast, and that's where I get the phrase too. Evil is the destruction of freedom.
Right.
And the way he describes faith in that book is almost like you can imagine when you're a child and you're taking your first steps. Like, you don't know how to walk yet, but at a certain point, you have faith in yourself, enough faith in your ability to stand up and balance for a second that you take that first step. And
Okay.
yeah, sometimes you do fall down, but you continue to have faith in yourself to get up and have that next step, that you're gonna be able to do it. It's a trusting in your own self. It's
That's a good way
not
to describe
knowing
it.
something that you don't know whether it exists or not. There is some ambiguity because, like I said, on your first step, sometimes you do fall,
Mm-hmm.
but deep down that you're not going to give up, that you're going to keep trying, and that it's like a willpower, inspiration, bravery type of thing. It's a combination of your personal internal religion, which is organizing your inner thoughts and binding yourself to an idea, right? So faith is something to me that's very personal and internal, not external. Like, I have faith, you know, do I have faith in Rick that he's going to have an answer to my question, or that we're going to meet today for a conversation? Like, I wouldn't use that term to describe that. That's more like, I trust you.
Right.
I believe you're going to show up
Right.
because you have in the past.
Yeah.
I have faith in myself. I have faith in my ability, but do I have faith that um, humanity is all of a sudden going to get better? I mean, that would
I
be
don't.
silly. That
I
would be
don't.
silly
Yeah.
because I don't have any evidence to that. I don't have anything to back that up. So, I mean, faith is an interesting word,
It's a
and I don't
tough one to
completely
describe.
have the definition, but
Wow.
I do feel like the way it's used in religion is dangerous, because it convinces you that it's okay to believe in something, a storyline that you can't prove,
That's what I was gonna say. Faith. They
and that
treat
it's
it as a
okay to do
belief.
that.
Yeah. They treat it as a belief, which is dangerous. Is what you're saying.
I mean, think back to Santa Claus.
That's a
When
good point.
we're just getting through Christmas, this is a perfect opportunity. Should kids have faith in Santa Claus? Is that a good thing? Why do we do that? Why do we put them through that? Why do kids get put through this process of basically all the adults in the world having this secret that they're sort of keeping from children, and they're using it to kind of like, what, to get the kids to act better, to have better behavior leading up to Christmas? Or is it just fun to mess
Mm-hmm.
with their mind, and then later when you're 10 years old, be like, haha, it was a big joke. We were just messing with you. There's this not the fat guy that climbs down your chimney and brings you presents. It's really us busting our butt every day. You know what I mean? Like, why would we put kids through that sort of torture of convincing them that all the adults are lying to them? You know, is that a
Yeah,
good type of thing to teach someone? And that's basically what faith is. It's convincing somebody that it's a good idea to believe in something that we don't know about, that might be very well be wrong. So that later you can have this terrible experience of realizing that everything you believed in was just a story.
very true. That's a good question to describe faith. I'm gonna have to try that. Now you're gonna have me thinking about that, Chris, now all day, because that's a tough one. I mean, and how many people have been asked that question? Like, how do you describe faith? Like, and I bet you a lot of people will be like, that's a tough one. Like, to me, when I
Well,
hear
and then
faith, it's a belief. That's where I like a leap of faith. Like when I think of that, I think of faith. Now you got me thinking. See, of faith, and it's a belief in yourself. I guess, is that a good way to describe it? Maybe.
well, belief is the next important word,
Like,
and
wow,
and
like
they're closely related. And
that's
and like
true.
for me, like I was just talking about with this someone last night. I don't like to use the word belief very much. I'll use it in certain ways, like I believe in myself, and that's kind of like what I'm describing as faith
Right. Yeah.
is the knowledge that in the past, even though I've made mistakes, I always try to do better,
Mm-hmm.
and that I recognize that I do have facilities that can gauge things and that can like the simple one I think of is jumping from rock to rock across a stream.
Yep.
It's something I love to do. I have a lot of faith in my own physical ability, right? I believe in myself,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that I'll try to jump from the shoreline to a rock if it feels a little bit out of my range of what I know I can do. And I know what I can do from past experience because I jump on stuff a lot,
Yep.
because I've practiced jumping from rock to rock a lot. So I can stand on the shoreline and I can look at a rock and I can get a pretty good feeling in my body like, ooh, that feels like a little bit out of my range.
Yep.
I don't have faith in myself that I'm going to make that successfully and not get wet. Therefore, I'm not going to make the jump, right? I don't trust myself to do it.
Right.
I don't have the belief that I can do it. And its belief is not based on just imagination or what someone else told me I can do. It's based on my actual experience of what I've actually done and what I've actually been managed to do in the past. And that's a totally different thing. It's very
That's
personal.
yeah. That's very personal.
Like beliefs don't come from external forces. They do, and that's where people get screwed up with them. But that's not the correct way for me to employ a belief is to see it as something that's a real destination in life. A belief is something that's very personal and inner work type of thing. I learn it by practicing it,
That's
and confirming
perfect.
what I can believe and what I can't. I don't believe in somebody. If someone tells me a lie, I'm less likely to believe them the next time they say something. If they
From
tell me two
experience.
lies, I
Yep.
don't really believe them much at all, right?
Yep.
They become less real. So I believe in things that have a history of being true. You know,
It's very simple,
that's a
but yeah.
science. It's
Yeah.
it's not a religion. It's an inner religion, but it's not an external religion. I'm not binding myself to things I can't validate or confirm.
That's a great way to explain that, Chris. Wow. And it's so true. And that because that's exactly when you said faith, like that's where I was kind of where my first thoughts went when you asked me that question was it's a belief in myself. Like, but it's hard to explain. You did it perfectly, but you like just even giving examples of jumping off the shore on the rocks and that. Like a faith I have is the faith that from experience that I will do it. I can do it. It's hard to word. You did it perfect. That's a
Well,
tough one.
here's the other side of it, and this is kind of like me right now reaching out to someone who might be listening, who's very in the Christian paradigm, right?
Hmm.
They're right now, if you're in that line of thinking, you're struggling with what I'm saying because you're saying no, but we have the gospel, we have the written word of God, we have the stories and the parables of Jesus,
Hmm.
and then we have our personal relationship with God, and that's you know part of every religion is trying to help you understand and feel and see that interconnection, that And I've had many times in my life what I describe as synchronicities. I get like this feeling in my spine. I get this, the hairs stand up on my neck.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've had a feeling. And like I was describing back in the days when I was reading the book by Brother Lawrence, that taught me that there's this conversation I can be having with this other part, this interconnection, right? And I do think that's very real. And it's not so easy to prove. It happens more in a right-brained, intuitive combination of logic and touching into your deeper self when you meditate, when you dream, when you get inspired, when you're reading something, when you see some words written on a screen, and then you hear someone say those words on the phone, and there's no possible way the person on the phone could have seen the
Yep.
words you just saw on the screen. And you have these moments in life when what I call the divine connection. You feel something else outside of the logical, physical, scientific world that's real. And a lot of people want to discount that and call it woo woo,
Yeah.
right?
Woo woo. Yep.
But this is one thing that I can meet eye to eye with someone who calls them a Christianity, is because I've experienced this over and over and over in life. And this is what, even though I got to the point where I decided I didn't want to be called a Christian, and that was partly because of history. I was looking at things like the Crusades and being like, through history, there's been a lot of Christians that have killed a lot of people and
Oh
done a lot
God.
of
Yeah.
terrible things. And I don't want to be associated with that type of business of coercing people what they need to think or believe. I don't want anything to do with that. And that was why I stopped calling myself a Christian, because I go, I'm about love. I'm about peace. I'm about care. I'm not about destroying people if they don't believe, or dunking them underwater,
Yep.
because they don't want to go along with what I'm saying. So I'm in a I want people to be able to think freely and come to conclusions because they're real and because they discovered them. And so that's really, I think an important aspect is this recognition that we do have this divine connection and this opportunity to have these moments of inspiration and realizations and things that come from somewhere else that's hard to describe. And that's the realm that gets tricky when you're talking about faith and belief, because people will go back and forth whether are those things true. I heard God talking in my head,
Yep.
therefore it must be true. It was God. But how do you know that was God talking in your head?
Yeah.
How do you know it wasn't a demon, tricking you into thinking that was right? And there've been people all through history that said, God told me this. God told me to go kill all these people.
Yeah.
And someone believed them because they said God told them. That's where it gets tricky. So how do we know the voice of the divine? How do we know when we're having a real connection, and when the inspiration that's flowing through us, or these feelings we get in our body and in our psyche, are actually real, and that they're actually leading us in a positive direction?
Very good point. Yeah, very good. And I'm glad you brought up the devil. We're gonna have to touch on that because I'm just going by. I'm glad you brought that up because I think I would have forgot, because it's a key point of the discussion that I was having with a couple people. We got it. We covered it. This was like a 5 hour conversation, Chris. We went into every aspect of like you could think of with Christianity and right and wrong and everything like that. But you bring up great points because that's what I always felt too. The problem I had with religion when I was growing up was I didn't understand why I had to have a priest tell me. I had to go to a priest, go to a building, a church, and then go to the priest, and I could talk to that's. And I'm only going by what I was taught, so I don't want a blanket statement saying that this is everybody's experience with religion. I can only speak clearly for what I went through. But I always questioned, why do I have to go through a middleman? Like, why can't I have a connection to the Creator, just have it wherever with myself if I'm at anywhere? And so that was why I was like questioning things, because I always felt most connected to the Creator, to the source, to the divine, as you call it, when I was out in nature and when I was doing good things in that, if you know what I mean. I just felt that connection, and that's where I felt it. And so I had trouble with the whole um, needing a middleman and the church aspect of it, because as you were saying, like, there's a lot of bad things that have went on for the church. There still is. I mean, if we're being honest, there's a lot of shady stuff going on. And when I see the Pope sitting on gold thrones and these huge halls and all of that, and I'm just thinking that's not what the Jesus character in the Bible, the Christ figure in the Bible ever thought had in mind. I'm sure when he was teaching. I mean, like, not to have this class of people that are above you and these gold thrones and controlling all of this wealth and putting these rules on people. Do you know what I mean? Like, where I'm coming, like,
Well,
I
when
always
you
felt,
really look back at what Jesus said and did, he was not a nice guy. I remember my dad
right.
used to have a
Yeah,
sermon actually that was called Jesus Was Not a Nice Guy. He called these Pharisees and these supposed teachers of religion fools.
exactly.
He did not mince words with these people.
Right.
He called them fools. He called them out right on their own, you know, right in their own grounds. He kicked over their tables in
Yep.
their church. You shouldn't be taxing people in the doorway to the church of your God. He kicked them down.
Yep.
This guy was a rebel, and he shook up everything they had going in the church. And if you think back to Martin Luther, one of the most famous stories of, modern Catholics and Christians have a lot to thank Martin Luther. He went
Hmm.
to the doors of the Catholic Church and says, "You can't create a middleman between me and God. These
Exactly.
words
Yeah.
are written down so anyone can read them. Now we have even a printing press." And what it says is not that people need to go through a bishop or a priest to reach God. What it says is that God is in each one of us and that anybody
Exactly.
can connect with them. And so how many hundreds of years went by before someone really made that point in a way that other people started understanding it, or maybe the technology of being able to print the words and spread them out more kind of probably helped with that process. But
Hmm.
for many years before that, people talk about occult, right? People using the power of the occult. That would have been the occult knowledge at that time. If you had knowledge of the scriptures, because you could read things and have access to knowledge that other people couldn't.
Right.
And they were keeping it to themselves, and they were charging people money, right? Poor people having to pay to come get a blessing or to
Yep.
come get a connection with God, when really the divine connection is available to everyone. And that's really what brings me to what I see as, put all the storylines aside for a minute. Imagine for a moment that you're born in the middle of a jungle, out in the middle of nowhere. No Bibles have ever been written, or they haven't made it out there for sure,
Hmm.
and you're just a little tribe member born into this world, and you're just living. You're going to say that that person has no access to the divine connection, that there's a God that created this universe and all these people, and it only is going to provide a conduit to doing the right thing for people that have this one book in their hand, that managed to get a hold of this book, but everybody else is cut out of this
Good
amazing
point.
process of learning. No. And here's how we can really get to the bottom of this. What I call the Bible, the living Bible, is nature. And
Exactly.
I was
Yep.
really influenced by Mark Passio's work on Neter, Neter, which was the Egyptian word for God. And when you think about it, nature being God's tapestry, reality itself, you can see it reflected in everything in nature, is a reflection of reality. There's shapes, there's sacred geometry in it. Trees grow in a certain way. When you stand on a mountaintop and look at the beauty and the wonder of it, it stirs you deep inside, right? Walking in nature is where I get a lot of my inspiration.
Me
Every
too.
poem or song ever written uses nature as the metaphor or allegory to describe more difficult topics.
Hmm.
So the Egyptian word of neter, to me, is a better way to look at what is the divine, what is God. It's our connection to the tapestry of reality, to what is, right? Take away all the storylines, that's all it really is. It's life itself. It's the generative process of growing, of changing. Anything you add to it is a storyline that you're making on top of that, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because that's where I always felt that I was most close to the source or to the divine was out in nature. Like, I mean, in these moments, and not even in nature. At just certain moments, I could be anywhere, but I would have this connection, and I didn't need a middleman. That was probably the thing I argued about the most that I remember, even to my parents and everybody. I would just say I don't need, like, I don't get it. I don't understand why people believe this. And so the couple things I wanted to touch on too, because I mean, I could talk to you for hours, Chris, about this. I really enjoy these conversations, and I think they have great value to people that want to learn these, what we're talking about, at least examine it and kind of dive into it a little deeper, um, is that when you look at the Bible, like I see it as a teaching. When I read the Bible, like I was saying earlier, I see the stories as teaching, as teachings, and exactly what a lot of people do see them as. Do I think they're word for word accurate? That's a whole different discussion. But a lot of people have problems that if you don't believe it word for word. I always say that if I can read it and I'm getting the teachings of learning principles and natural law and objective morality, all of the things that we talk about, that's a win, and I think that's a great thing. But what are your thoughts on that? Because do you see it as, like, how do you see the word? Do you see it as teaching natural law? Like, where are your views on that? Because the one thing that the discussion, where just to end on this, when we had the discussion, I was trying to explain natural law, and like that's what I get from the teachings of the Bible, and then they threw at me that there's nowhere in the Bible where it says that natural law, and I was like, that's not a really good argument. I thought, I kind of giggled. So, what are your thoughts? Because I'd like to get your opinion.
Well, kind of like rights. Where does truth come from? Do rights come from the Constitution? Does truth come from the Bible? Do rights come from the Bible? So does that mean before the Bible was written, there was no such thing as truth, and there was no such thing as law itself?
Mm-hmm.
Did those things, the advent creation of law, begin at the writing of the Bible? So all people through history, in the Old Testament, for instance, before it was written, they didn't have truth or divine law?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that's kind of weird.
That is weird.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense? What I took, here's a quote from the Bible. This is from
Perfect.
Matthew 7:16. A tree and its fruit. Beware of the false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. So right there in the Bible, in Matthew, in the New Testament, we're talking about false prophets, and it's a huge warning. It's saying, watch out for wolves in sheep clothing. And what is the allegory of a wolf in sheep's clothing? So how else is the devil going to come to you and trick you, but through words and acting like he's on the good side, right? Or
Right.
she, or whatever the devil is.
Yeah.
It's going to trick you. So the message here is don't be easily tricked. And then it goes on to talk about fruit, right? Allegories, like I said, every song, every poem in history always uses nature, because nature is the reflection of the divine reality.
Right.
So that's what we can use to um, kind of make some understanding of things, like hermetics. That helps us break things down and understand things. So he's saying, what do you do when we're in this world where there's all these false prophets or people telling stories, right, to trick you,
Yeah.
right? You judge them by their fruit. You recognize the truth of this reality, that figs don't grow on thorns. So we can't get fruit. We don't get live things from dead things. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
There's some very real things we can look at in nature, we can look at in our own body, and we can experience, and we can use those things to kind of like extrapolate a little bit, right?
Yep.
So I'm getting a little stuck now, but I think that's my main point
No,
there
that
that I
was
wanted to make.
perfect. Yeah, that was
Again,
perfect.
even the Bible's telling you look at nature. It's telling you watch out for people trying to trick you.
Right, and
You know?
then now that's a great segue, because I was gonna, like I said earlier, I want to talk about the devil, because this came up, and I would imagine that some people listening to this would say what they're talking about is exactly what the devil would do. The devil would tell people not to. I'm trying. I want to make sure I word this right, and please help me, Chris, along with this. But I think people are going to get what I'm kind of coming at. But I've had people say that this is what the devil wants. He wants you to have these discussions. That's how he's inserting and breaking you away from God. That's what they would. That's what I was told, is that this discussion that we're having would be the work of the devil. He wants us questioning the Bible. He wants us questioning faith. Everything that we're talking about right now would be considered the work of the devil. My question is, what you think about that statement, and what do you see the devil like? I know a lot of people see the Hollywood version or the biblical version, guy with horns, tail. It's a tough one, but what do you think? Because I know I've had people say that this discussion we're having is exactly what the devil would want. That's how he's getting in.
Right. And that's, it's going to be tricky for anyone who's going to say that all truth comes from the Bible, right?
Right.
If you think all truth and all reality come from the Bible, that the Bible created this reality, or that everything started at the point when the Bible was published or written, or I don't know exactly what point, that it can't be real if it's not in there. That's a very difficult viewpoint for me to work with, because that would mean that, like, the devil, for instance, only exists in the way that the Bible talks about the devil. And I mean, what's weird is the Bible doesn't really spend a lot of time describing the devil. I mean, it's almost hard. I mean, now that I think about it, I would have to go through my I have a Bible with all the tablature. I mean, a study Bible that I could go through and find everywhere where it talks about the devil, and I'd be curious to do that. But
me too. I'd like to hear that.
Again, like, for me, if we're defining words, I'm not going to anthropomorphize this evil like into just one entity. Is there some evil entity on the earth or in the universe? I don't know. Maybe it's all accumulated in one thing, but I kind of don't see it that way. But for all practical purposes, when I'm talking about evil, what I'm talking about is the destruction of freedom.
Right.
So when we're born into this life, we have this body, right? And it's inherent. It's divine. It's not our choice to put ourselves in this body. Maybe it is, but we don't know that for sure. We just know we're here, and I can move these digits, I can move these fingers, I can move these eyes, but that's mine, right? So when somebody else tries to take that away from me, that becomes evil, because it's not theirs to take. Right. That's the way the universe and just whatever, happened to create us here decided to do it. It didn't give us ability to control other people's body, unless we get some complicated technical device and we try to implant it in their head or something. That's evil, because we're trying to create a reality that the divine, the God, the natural process didn't create. It didn't give us these abilities to own other people. That's that's like an invention that we're trying to make work, but it's actually evil. So from my definition, all evil is the destruction of the good, and the good is just doing anything that's not harming others. That's all good. Like what I say, all good, right?
All good.
It's just not hurting others, not purposefully lying, not purposely stealing, not raping, any type of taking of the generative force of reality, of nature that's trying to grow, and you're trying to diminish that aspect and create something all your own that you can control. That's what evil is from my point of view. Right. And this whole idea of the devil, it gets pretty silly, because honestly, what's funny to me is not funny. A lot of people that I've had these discussions with when I was part of Christian church don't actually believe in the devil.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people don't actually believe in the devil, because it seems like too silly of a, it's not well defined in most churches either. What are we talking about here with the devil? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about an actual being. Right. I do think that there might be some sort of really evil being on this planet that is causing a lot of problems. That's been around for a really long time. That's a possibility that I'm willing to consider. Too. But I wouldn't call that the devil necessarily. Maybe Leviathan. I've heard that name used as this sort of source of this evil entity that lives on this planet. I've heard somebody
say AI.
But that's not evil itself.
Right.
That's not evil itself. Yeah. That's tapping in. It's using this evil force, right?
Right.
And evil itself, when you really zoom out, and I'm not in my human body now, and I'm just interplanetary perspective, evil's not bad. It's a natural thing. There's going to be this ebb and flow of people doing terrible things to other people and then experiencing the consequences. And when you look in terms of an era or an epoch, that's not really bad. That's just how things work. But when you're in a human body, and you're experiencing the effects of evil, it's terrible. It could mean
Exactly.
you're dead or murdered or raped. So, the word changes depending on the perspective you're looking at it from. When we're talking about the yin yang and good and evil from a grandiose perspective, nothing's bad or good. It's just light and dark, male and female, different aspects of a wavelength. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But when you zoom into your own body and you're living a personal experience as a being, now it has a different feeling and meaning to it. It's like being in the third dimension versus the sixth dimension,
Right. Yeah.
And so what evil means in a real practical sense in being in a body is you're losing rights. Things are being taken from you. Things are being stolen from you. Things are being ripped away that shouldn't be ripped away.
Hmm.
Someone's trying to take your hand. Someone's trying to take your body. Someone's trying to take your sexuality. Someone's trying to take your interpretation of reality and skew it into a false interpretation of reality. That's what evil is. That's
Yeah.
that's the way I see it.
That's a great description too, because that was the one that you asked me in one of our first interviews too that I did with you. You're asking me like, what is evil? Like, and I remember asking you that too, and then I was like, wow, like a lot of people don't sit down and actually think about the word itself and then what it means. So I love when you do that. Now you're gonna have me thinking about faith all day. Trust me, Chris, when I say that, I'm gonna be like examining faith and just the word itself, and I'm glad that you did that because it's important. But
I
what?
looked. I do. Well, you're on the word faith. I did have the etymology of it in front of me
Oh,
too.
perfect. That'd be great.
Where did I put it? I had it right here. Too many windows.
Have faith, it'll be there.
Yeah. Well, I'll just pop it up again real quick. But basically, here it is. Yeah, faith, to trust, confide, persuade. Um, Faith, belief, trust, confidence, pledge, reliance, credence, belief. From fidere, to trust. Right.
Hmm.
So confide or confidence is an interesting thing that comes up in there, and that's kind of what I was describing. The way I like to use the word faith is more like having confidence,
That's a good, yeah, confidence. Yeah.
and it's something that's built on reality. It's not built on complete imagination. There's a little bit of imagination and creation involved. Hey, I'm going to try to jump further than I have before, you
But you're
know.
building off of your past experiences.
Right. You're believing in what
Yep.
you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
and you're building on it just a little bit. You're taking a little leap of faith, right?
Yep. That's really cool. Like, and that's cool that you brought that up because that said a lot in those descriptions. And I like doing that. I love looking up words too. Because we're talking about the devil. Like, I also hear a lot of people talking about the Antichrist, and what I just want to get your thoughts, because when I think of the Antichrist, I don't necessarily think it kind of like the devil. I don't think of it as this being. I think when I hear the Antichrist, I think of that as ignorance. That's where I take it to, because I think that is uh the true evil is ignorance, that people are just not willing to have the discussions we're having. They're not willing to look at different things and look outside the box. Do you kind of see it that way? Because I can't see the Antichrist. I'm only bringing this up because it was part of the discussion I had with these people, but I don't see the Antichrist as a figure, one person kind of setting everything in motion. I see it as ignorance. I see it as exactly that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was saying before. We use generalizations when we're getting into topics that are hard to grapple with,
It's a
right?
tough one. Yeah.
And this whole idea of Christ, it's a term that I have a lot of trouble with because it doesn't have a practical translation for me into life. There's nothing in my life that I call a Christ.
Right.
Uh, it's just not a term that I can really translate in a way that makes a lot of sense to me. So,
You probably feel the same about Antichrist then.
yeah, it's just the term doesn't mean much to me.
Right.
You know what I mean? In
Yeah. I
practical
was just
terms. And I'm a
asking because
very
yeah.
practical person. Like I mentioned Alan Watts before.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really interesting philosopher who studied both Eastern religion and Western religion, and he kind of made a synthesis, and he wrote a lot of books, and he does a lot of videos. You can look him up on YouTube. He said, "You can't get intelligent beings from an unintelligent universe."
Great point.
And I think that's really important, and it kind of goes along with what I was saying too. My other point about a good tree bears good fruit,
Mm-hmm.
right? So where do we actually come from? Do we come from the Bible? Were we born out of the words of the Bible? Or were we born out of a womb of nature's functions? The tree is the person that, you know what I mean, bears the fruit, which is
Right.
the new person, right? And so when we look at reality of where we actually come from, it's a very real world thing that happens. It's very physical, and someone's got to have pain and they got to work to make it happen,
Yep.
And when it happens, so that again is backing what I'm saying about this thing about nature and what we can actually see and experience and put our hands on and touch and feel. And let's start there, right? Before we get into all these storylines.
Very
And
true.
so I would say, what's the dark side of ourself? What maybe that's the Antichrist, right? There's a lot of aspects of myself, what we call sometimes shadow work or inner work, where we make choices or we get too egotistical, or we have desires that lead us down paths that later we start to see as dark, and then we look back at some of these things as mistakes, or
Yep.
I wish I'd have done things differently. Why? It seems like a lot of people, the psychopaths in the world, can accumulate more money and power than anyone else, and they can kill people and rape people and
And
enslave
still sleep
people,
at night.
and somehow they seem to be doing really well.
Yeah.
So that confuses people. How could that be? They're not getting struck down by lightning, and God's not coming from on a high and destroying them. Well, maybe he's just waiting and he's going to do it later. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I've heard that. Yep.
But
Yep.
but look inside. What is it that makes you do good things? What is it that makes you not want to hurt somebody else? What is that invisible force, right? There's a conscience. Where does that come from? You know?
Hmm.
And that part of us is what I would think of as the Christ, right? That's our conscience.
Yep. Christ
That's a
conscience.
gift that comes from nature. You're born with it. It's in all of us. I don't know. Maybe there are some beings or people on this planet that don't have access to it, and maybe that's part of the problem. I'm not sure about that aspect of it. But I know in me, there's something that's always been there, and I see it in children and even dogs.
Yep. My
They don't
cats.
want to,
Yep.
they want to do things right to an extent. They're a little different than humans, but it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
And there's something in us that knows, that feels guilt, that feels sadness, that feels anxiety when things aren't right. And that's our conscience. That's our divine connection. That's our Christ. So the opposite of that would be the part of us that chooses solipsism, that chooses ignorance, that
Yeah.
chooses the path of what I want, what's best for me right in this moment.
Yep.
What are my desires? What can I just take? And any of us that have gone down those paths are going to experience suffering and misery. And
Very
so it's
true.
right there for you. That's the Antichrist, is experiencing what happens when you make choices that go against your inner purpose and your inner love and your care for nature
Right.
and the divine love and life.
Great points, Chris. Wow. I mean, this is such a great discussion. Thank you so much. And I mean, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I got so many other questions, but we can always do a part two or something because you're always welcome to come back and talk about any topics because I learned so much from just listening and having these discussions. So I really appreciate the time that you take. The one thing I wanted to touch on to kind of wrap it up is like I always look at I'm trying to make like kind of put it into words of what I'm saying. Um this belief, like, and I guess it ties in the belief that we were discussing earlier because I've talked to a lot of people and they truly do have this belief that one day uh Christ, you'll hear them say, and I've talked to them myself, and they'll say that eventually Christ is going to come down. He's going to save all the good people and then deal with all the bad people. So there's not much you can do about it. They have this belief that this is going to happen, and you just got to kind of skim along the rules, and they're going to be part of that being saved group. And I just want you to talk about and I probably this would fall into the new age religions too. And I get a little upset when I hear people say that because to me, when I hear people say that, it puts them in like a no action stand down mode, which is, I think, how we got into the mess that we're in the world, is that people not acting. And so I just want to get your thoughts on that, because there is a lot of these new age religions. I was kind of doing a search before this interview, and just some of the new age religions out there, and there's a lot. I'm like, wow, they are really storming people with, kind of keep them in the religion aspect, but now they got all these new age ones. And I just want to get your thoughts, because that's how I see it, is that it's like, when you have this belief that there's a savior, and it could be, I'm not just saying it could be a god figure. I've heard people say that in the alien conspiracy, that there's going to be aliens that come and save us one day, and why haven't
Yeah,
they
the
come?
Palladians.
The Palladians. So what is your thought on that? To me, I get it's a dangerous way to look at things, because you're not acting. So what are your thoughts on this whole? I know I asked quite a bit there, so if you want to break it down, take it where you
No,
want.
that's for me, it's kind of a good segue to get to my last point, really,
Yeah.
which is about being a principle-based human being and making your decisions from a place of principle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is something that people really struggle with. That principles are kind of like the foundation of the house, right?
Agreed.
Or the roots of the tree. That without the principles, everything's shaky. You know,
Yep.
without the foundation, without the roots, things can blow in the wind, they can fall down, they can go any direction. So we have to bring things back to some sort of um, rooted groundedness. And if we allow ourselves to be captivated by stories and storylines, those are things that people can make up and have all through history.
Yep.
And when we look, like, part of what I did in the Ultimate Connection was I looked at the history of the Bible and the books that came before it
Yeah, that was
and
great.
all the books and translations that have come along the way.
Yep.
And there's hundreds of iterations of this different stories. And then if you look back before the Bible, you got things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, you got the Dead Sea Scrolls, you got, you know, astrology,
Mm-hmm.
that actually shows up in the Bible, and stories that were um, reused,
Like refurbished. In a way.
refurbished and reused and put together with other stories
Yep.
that came from previous storytelling. So, a lot of people want to believe that the Bible's divinely inspired and it's exactly what God wants, and otherwise it wouldn't be that way. And there's nothing I can do to shake people out of seeing things that way if they're completely bought into that. But I can say for me that doesn't work because it can't be validated, it can't be proved. But principles can be.
Right.
Principles can always be validated and proved, and we can always go back to principles. And whatever God, divine intelligence is behind all this, invented a world where there are principles and that you can test.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing's going to happen every time you throw a heavy rock into the air. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Every time you go to the edge of a cliff and throw something off, the same thing's going to happen. You know, and if it wasn't true, we wouldn't have electricity, we wouldn't have thermodynamics, we wouldn't have math. All
Yep.
these things work because there's a consistency in reality and there's a consistency in the universe and its principles. And so we have to go back to the principles to make these harder choices and to think about these harder things. And the principle of the issue is that morality is inherent. It's built in. It's built into what we are. It's not something that we create, right? It's something we either align to or we don't. And then we experience the results of that. And that's the heart of what natural law is.
Yep.
And everything else that goes beyond that, me saying, oh, well, this is what's going to happen after we die. This is what happened before we die. This is what really happened in history. Those are all stories that can't really be proven. But we can prove the principles, and those principles are the divine. They're they're the boundaries of reality, and we can look at them, we can feel them, we can feel vibrations, we can see how things are reflected in other things. You can look in the water and see a reflection, right?
Yep.
The sun comes up, the moon, these things are always there, and they're consistent, and they're part of creation. So why don't we look to those things that we know for sure and be inspired by them, right? instead
Exactly.
of getting tricked by what might be a storyline that
Yeah.
someone might have made up or not, that we can't really confirm.
Yeah.
Because we ultimately get to the same truth, is that it's not okay to steal from other people. It's not okay to take things that aren't yours. And that we want to treat others, and that includes nature, the way that we want to be treated, which is
Exactly.
ultimately going back to the golden rule and don't harm.
Yeah.
And you have a right to defend your own stuff. You know, it's
Yeah.
really pretty simple. We can agree on those things. And even if you do want to be stuck on believing in the Bible's the literal truth of everything, well, you can keep believing that, but it might lead you into situations where you break that natural law rule, where you think it's okay to steal from someone because God told you to, or God told somebody else to tell
Great
you
point.
to, right? And if
Yes.
you're in that state of mind and you're manipulatable, then the wolf in sheep's clothing has every opportunity to trick you. And you've allowed that to happen by being a fool.
So true. Yeah, and you're right. Yeah, wow, and that you're right too, Chris. Because as I was saying in these discussions I've had, we agreed on more than we disagreed. It was really shocking. So that's a great way that you kind of wrap that up. Like you can agree on certain things, and we all want the golden rule like you were saying, and we want to treat others good and stuff. So it's really important, and that's kind of like where I left the discussion with my friend, that we were having this discussion about religion and stuff. It was kind of like we agreed on a lot of it, which was great. I mean, like I think that's a great thing, and can't ask for more than that. I mean, I wasn't trying to change him. I wasn't trying to say he was wrong or anything like that. It was just, I don't even know when we were talking how we got into the discussion, but it kind of showed up. And then 5 hours later, I was like, wow. And as you said, we have a lot more in common than we do that, like, not in common. And I think that's something that's really important to point out and very valuable.
Yep. And hey, we're going to continue this conversation with our group, the One Great Work Warriors, and I'm looking forward to that talk. And
This is a good primer.
yeah, we'll get in some more on there, and we'll hear some more points of view, and we'll keep digging in this subject, and
It's a
maybe
big one.
we'll see where it goes from there.
Absolutely. So I definitely don't want to keep you much longer, Chris. Thank you. Do you want? I want to give you the floor. Like, let everybody know. Like, do you have anything coming up? Are you working on anything?
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
anything you want to
yeah.
put out there? The floor is yours.
I'm always working on stuff.
That's true.
If you haven't yet, check out chrisjantzen.com. And there you can sign up for the newsletter, the One Great Work Warriors newsletter. And this year, I'm really committing to working harder on that. I send out little emails, and I just, I do little talks, and I want to share more of other people's work in the future on that email newsletter. And that's also a way to kind of keep up with what I'm working on. And I'm going to start infusing a lot more what we're working on in the One Great Work Warriors in that newsletter. So go to chrisjantzen.com and put your email in there so you can be part of what's going on there. And then endevil.life is where I house my podcast. There's always episodes that I haven't put on there yet because I'm kind of
Sounds like
always
me.
catching up. But you can follow my link tree. I have Facebook and YouTube and all that. And One Great Work.
One Great Work Network.
Sorry, yeah, blanked out. Brain fart. Yeah, One Great Work Network. You can look me up, Chris Jantzen there. Most of my work's there. But I really want to send people to freedomundernaturallaw.com because we're gearing up now to start working on Funnel 3.
Amazing. Yep.
And it's starting to come into focus, and we're working on that. That's going to be later this year. And so there's going to be a lot of information coming on about that. But you can go to freedomundernaturallaw.com. You can join the newsletter there.
Cool.
And you can see all the presentations. The ultimate connection that I was talking about is listed down there from Funnel 1. And then the teamwork episode I did in Funnel 2 is there as well. And Rick's work too. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and can you just let people know, though, because you're talking about the One Great Work Warriors, and that's really new actually for all of us. Can you kind of like
Yeah.
let people know a little bit about that? Because we've already done a couple great talks that I've got great feedback from. People are really enjoying the discussions that we're having. So can you let people know a little bit about what it is, how it started?
Yeah. I mean, I started off on my podcast is looking for other people with like minds that wanted to do the work that you and I are doing, Rick, and that we're, interested in working together,
Mm-hmm.
because I did that presentation called Humanity's Most Powerful Weapon, where I was describing, really, if we want to make a change in the world, we're going to have to work together.
It's true.
All of us just by ourselves talking isn't going to do it. We need to start networking and using teamwork to really push this thing forward. And so I put the call out, and I got some great responses. Rick was one of them. Jim and Jerry and Brandon and Derek have all joined. We're the Warriors at this point. We're meeting weekly, and we're creating content, and we're gonna encourage other people to join our newsletter, where we can keep them aware of what we're working on, and we're gonna see where we can grow. But I mean, I have some vision about it, but I'm trying to include the other members of the group so we can all kind of build this together,
Right.
and not just my thing, but our thing. And
It's
that's where I'm going
amazing.
with that.
Yeah,
So
the discussions we've
yeah.
had, like I was saying, I've got great feedback from everybody that's heard the couple that we've done and posted. We hit some hard topics there, and we're going to be hitting the religion one again. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And another great thing too, Chris, about the One Great Work Warriors is that we have a couple we have a couple members of it that are actually starting their own YouTube channels. So people are really starting to go out there and take that first step, which I think is incredible.
Yeah. You got to get involved, though. I mean, you got to reach out, and people like myself and Rick and the other members of our group, they love hearing from other people.
Yep.
So, if you're watching and you're curious and you want to get more involved, all you have to do is reach out,
Yep.
get our email, comment on the videos, show up for the shows, and you can get involved and become an activist, become a hero for the next generations, and die knowing that you made an effort
Yep.
to change this dynamic of slavery in the world. Because right now, evil is the prevailing force, and it's
Absolutely.
our duty, job, and it's our call to do something about that situation and not tolerate it any longer.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoyed this. I was looking forward to this, and I'm super happy that you can make the time to come and talk to me once again. You're always welcome to come back and have a discussion. I could talk to you for hours because I learned
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much.
you let me go. I really start talking too. Thanks,
I
Rick.
love it
Appreciate it.
though. I love it because that's how I
You got
just
me going.
yeah, I just like learning, and so hearing, and I knew this was going to be a touchy subject because it's a touchy subject in general. So I knew that you would be the guy to come and talk about this. And as you said, the One Great Work Warriors, we're going to be doing a discussion on this too, which is going to be incredible because we're going to get more input from other people. So that's going to be a great one. I hope people look forward to that. So thank you so much, Chris. I mean, for your time and all the great work you're doing out there. It's incredible and it's needed. And I just really thank you. I can't thank you enough for everything
Thank
that you're
you,
doing.
Rick. Yeah, much love, brother.
Same to
Always
you.
look forward to talking to you. All right,
Awesome.
man.
So if you want to stick around, I can put you in the background. I just got to wrap up the show or whatever because we're kind of figuring out StreamYard here.
I got a hike to go on. I'm gonna cut out.
Okay, you cut out and I will wrap the show up. Thank you so much, Chris, and I will keep in
Yeah.
touch and I'll see you soon, brother.
All right. Much
All
love.
right, much love.
We'll be
Take
in
care, brother.
touch.
All right,
Thanks, Rick.
peace, brother.
All right. Bye.
Well, there we go, guys. That is the way to wrap up an amazing show with an amazing guest. And wow, it's a touchy subject. It really is. But it's one that's got to be talked about because, as I was saying at the beginning, for the last few, almost 3 weeks, I've gotten into this discussion about religion a lot for some reason. So it's definitely, I think, something I have to look into and start really diving into even more than I have been. It's just been put in my path, and I just knew that Chris Jantzen was the gentleman to come and to talk about this because I've talked to him about religion before, and we've had this discussion. In a previous interview, we kind of touched on it. I've had Chris on before, so you can go back in the playlist and you can see the other interviews I've done with Chris. And so we've touched on this, and it's a really intense conversation that you have with certain people, but one that's needed to happen, and this has to happen. And I just think that this is a great way to do it. Let's just have a discussion. We don't, necessarily have to agree on everything, but at least be willing to talk and have the discussion, I think is important. And as Chris was saying, and as I even found out, we have a lot more in common with people that are really religious than we have in most cases uncommon. So I just think that's a great way to end this. And don't forget to, if you enjoy radio, I am at Revolution Radio, which you can get to at freedomslips.com. And I'm on twice a week. So Saturday evenings, I'm on with my co-host Jonathan Wright, and we are in Studio B, and we're on from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is the Crypt Rick and Jonathan show. And then you can also catch me on Mondays for the Crypt Rick's I've Been Thinking show. That's in Studio A, and that is also from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I've got my interviews and that are posting to Rumble, so you can check it out there if you are on Rumble. You can also check me out at the One Great Work Network as well, along with well over 50 other amazing content creators that are doing some incredible work over there, guys. So please check out the One Great Work Network. I will make sure links for Chris's website and his YouTube channel and all of the great, all of the stuff that you can get in contact and see his content will be in the description, as along with for the radio show for One Great Work Network. I'll try to put all the links in the description, make it easy for you guys. So just please check it out. Lots of great stuff going on over there. And I just want to also thank you guys so much for taking the time once again to come and check out this interview. And, you guys mean the world to me, and your support means the world to me. I really enjoy doing this, as I always say, and I'm going to keep doing it. I got some great interviews lined up for the new year. Very excited. I'm definitely going to be touching on a lot of great topics, and I have some incredible guests coming on. So I'm really excited for the new year and trying to get more of the great work done and just continue what I'm doing and get better at doing it and get my content better. So I'm really looking forward to this year and making some big strides. That's my goal. I got a lot of goals that I want to hit. So it's going to be a really cool year. And I'm just so happy that you guys are here to be part of it. And your support means the world to me, guys. It really does. I can't thank you guys enough. I really can't. So thank you guys. I mean, amazing. So I will wrap up this show then, and just, hit the like and subscribe, the share, whatever you like, the notification, because I'm going to be posting these interviews now. I got enough lined up that I can start posting them, at least a new one every week. So just keep your eye open for that. As I was saying, a lot of great interviews are coming up. I've interviewed some incredible people, and we get into some really great topics and important topics. So I hope you guys check it out. So hope everybody had a great new year, a safe new year, and is looking forward to 2023. And I will see you guys soon. Take care. Stay safe. Love each other. And look after each other, guys. Peace.
Are you interested in the paranormal? Murder mysteries, cryptocurrency, and thought-provoking interviews? Then check out Crypt Rick's I've Been Thinking on YouTube, or every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Studio A at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Welcome to the Crypt.